You're listening to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. Remember to like, share, comment, subscribe, and click the bell to make sure you get the latest episodes of the podcast. Be sure to like and share our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and on Instagram. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast. And on today's episode of the podcast, we're going to be reviewing the second test of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India from the Adelaide Oval. And what a test match it was. It was all over in 3 days. It was short, sharp, and quick. But what we saw over the 3 days was some exciting cricket from both sides, some wonderful bowling from Stark and Cummins. Travis Head was sublime with his batting. There was a bit of spice with him and Siraj, which has been making the headlines following this test match. The lights went out, which was a bit of a bizarre thing to happen during play. So this test match had it all, but what it does reiterate is that Australia have bounced back superbly, winning by 10 wickets, just what they needed to level the series back at 1-1 after what was a very disappointing performance in Perth in the first test. What it has done is got Australia back into the series, and it has certainly done that. On the other hand, for India, after the highs of Perth, they've come back crashing down to earth, to the lowest of lows here in Adelaide, with a crushing 10-wicket defeat. And they weren't at their best in this test match in Adelaide. India, obviously, not much experience in day-night tests, obviously, it has to be said. Australia are very experienced in the day-night test cricket format. But for India, they'll be disappointed after what was a dominant win in Perth to come to Adelaide and to lose in this manner. Really does put some pressure on them. Also, they've got some questions to ask themselves about Rohit Sharma, where he should bat in the order, the backup bowling to Bumrah, the support there, Bumrah's injury concern. Is he going to be ready for Brisbane? So they've got a lot of questions, India, to answer going into the next test in Brisbane for the third test of this series. But an exciting test match nonetheless, and Australia bouncing back to level the series at 1-1, which was a very important win for this Australian cricket team. A very important game in the series as well to come back. If there was one test match to bounce back for Australia, it was certainly the day-night test here in Adelaide, and that's what happened. So plenty to dissect and talk about from this test match. So let's get straight into it. And first of all, have a look at the match summary and how both teams went about their business in this second test of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy from the Adelaide Oval. India won the toss and they batted first, and they were all out for 180 in the first innings. Nitish Kumar Reddy top scored with 42. Mitchell Stark was sublime with the ball, 6 for 48. He led the way there for Australia. Australia, in reply to India's first innings, were all out for 337. Travis Head stole the show, 140 for him, and Jasprit Bumrah and Mohammad Siraj took 4 wickets each to lead the way with the ball there for India. India in their second innings were bowled out for 175. Nitish Kumar Reddy again top scored with 42, just like he did in the first innings. And Pat Cummins took 5 wickets and returned to some sort of his best after what was a disappointing test match for him with the ball in Perth. He bounced back superbly here in Adelaide. And Australia needed 19 runs to win. They chased them down, none down. And Nathan McSweeney top scored with 10 not out. And Australia won by 10 wickets, and Travis Head was named the player of the match for his 140. So that's pretty much what happened across the 3 days of this second test from the Adelaide Oval between Australia and India. Now, as we know in test matches, there's some key moments and key factors that change the course of a game and really have an impact on how the test match was won and lost for both sides. And there were plenty of key moments and key factors from this game. Mitchell Stark's opening over, the first ball of the test match, was a key moment. Removing Jaiswal, first ball for a golden duck, LBW, which was a fantastic delivery from Stark. Not a surprise to see him bowl those type of deliveries, which swing back in and trap you on the pads. That set the tone for Australia. That was a key moment. Australia needed to bounce back, needed to show a bit of fight, a bit of energy after what was a disappointing result in the first test. For Mitchell Stark to do that, to get rid of Jaiswal, first ball of the innings, LBW, really set the tone for Australia and allowed Australia to bowl India out for 180 and pretty much set Australia on track for this test match. And then you have the Labuschagne and McSweeney second wicket partnership of 67 was crucial in terms of Australia navigating that nighttime tricky period under lights, which is often the case in a day-night test. When you're batting under lights, the pink ball does do a bit. By them batting through that period, only being 1 wicket down at the end of the day, really set up Australia in terms of them building a very good first innings lead, which resulted in 157 runs and really put India under pressure in this test match. That partnership between Labuschagne and McSweeney, second wicket 67, was very crucial indeed. And then obviously you have Travis Head's innings. 140 was a game-changing innings. And that was the moment that this test match swung heavily towards Australia. He came in at 3 for 103, Travis Head, and Australia was still trailing by 77. So if the game was still in the balance there, if India picked up another couple of wickets and were able to get a first innings lead, that's where the game really changed in the favour of Australia. Travis Head went off, did what he did, scored 140. Australia made 337. 157 run lead was very crucial for Australia to win this test match. And that was a big key moment in this match that really decided the test match in Australia's favour. And Australia were able to bowl India out in their second innings and only chase 19 runs to win. So there were plenty of key moments and key factors in this second test in Adelaide. But some of those key moments were very important for Australia to win and to make the most of that opportunity, which they did. And they were able to dominate this test match from start to finish. Now let's talk about both teams and their performances across the test match with bat and ball, and talk about where it went right and went wrong and what they need to do going forward into the third test in Brisbane. We'll start with Australia. And first of all, I've got to say, a great comeback. Following the crushing defeat in Perth, if there was one test to come back for Australia, it was Adelaide with the day-night test. They are the day-night test champions when it comes to day-night test cricket. They've won all 8 day-night tests in Adelaide since 2015-16, which was the first one against New Zealand. They know how to win with the pink ball. They know how to play in these sort of day-night test matches. Compared that to India, who haven't played a lot of day-night test cricket. That certainly showed across the 3 days in this test match. But it was a great comeback from Australia. I don't think anyone expected Australia to bounce back the way they did here in Adelaide. After what happened in Perth, a lot of people were calling for sackings and calling for changes, and people were saying sack the lot and drop everyone. But the Australian team didn't fall into that trap. It could have been easy for Australia to fall into the trap and make massive changes. But I suppose it was an overreaction, from the media and fans. Whenever your team doesn't do well, of course, there's overreaction. But Pat Cummins said, there's no need to panic. There's no need to panic. We know where we need to improve on and look to, really hit those markers in Adelaide. And they certainly did that. And they dominated this test match from start to finish. It was a better batting performance and it was a better bowling performance as well. They certainly dominated with bat and ball. So let's talk about the batting. It was disappointing in Perth. They really struggled in that test match. But in Adelaide, they batted much better. They showed good intent. They were positive. They were looking to score. Good signs with the bat for Australia. Scored 337 in the first innings, which gained Australia a 157 run lead after India were bowled out for just 180. As I mentioned earlier, McSweeney, Marnus Labuschagne, that partnership of 67 for the second wicket was crucial. They batted in that nighttime period late on day one, and it could have been a lot worse for Australia than it was. They were 1 for 86 at stumps on day one, and that partnership got them through to the end of play on day one. And that was such a pivotal moment. If McSweeney and Labuschagne didn't do that, Australia would have lost 3 or 4 wickets and probably would have been behind in this test match and India were probably going to be in the driver's seat. But what those two did well was that they weathered the storm, especially Jasprit Bumrah, who was bowling well. But to be fair, India sort of helped them out a little bit because India didn't bowl well. They weren't challenging in the stumps. They weren't making Labuschagne and McSweeney play. Both of them were able to leave the ball outside off stump quite a bit during that period. India bowled a fraction short, and they sort of wasted the new ball under lights, which you can't do in a day-night test with the pink ball. But those two, it was great fight and resilience to see them get through that, especially get through Bumrah as well. So Australia won for 86 going into day two, and then entered Travis Head. What can we say about Travis Head? 140, nearly a run a ball, century, came in at 3 for 103, and Australia still trailing by 77 runs. So the game was still in the balance, and it was important for Australia to continue on. And, McSweeney and Labuschagne, that partnership added 67. And then obviously Labuschagne and Travis Head combined, they added 65 runs for the fourth wicket. And then Travis Head just went off after that. And it was the Travis Head show. It was a superb innings. Travis Head's got this ability to change games in a matter of moments. And I'm pretty sure India are pretty sick and tired of seeing him do this, causing a few headaches, pardon the pun. Superb player, Trav, and took the game away. Some of the shots he played were pretty superb. That flick shot off the pads that he hit Siraj over deep square leg with for 6 was unbelievable. That was the 6 that he hit just before he got out to Siraj with that Yorker that clean bowled him. But Travis Head, hometown hero, his 3rd century at the Adelaide Oval, his 8th in his Test career. And he's the only South Australian to score 300s at the Adelaide Oval. To put that into context, the Chappell brothers didn't even score 300s at Adelaide Oval. Neither did other South Australian legends who've played Test cricket for Australia haven't. So it just shows that Travis Head is a special player, and he loves batting here at the Adelaide Oval. It's his home ground after all, and the crowd were very behind him in terms of, making their feelings known to what happened with him and Siraj and the few words that was said. But he pretty much changed the game and turned it around in Australia's favour. He batted well in Perth as well, Travis Head. He got 89 in that second innings in Perth. So to score 100 here in Adelaide, it just shows that he was coming into this test match with some good form in the second innings in Perth to here. It was brilliant to see him do what he does. India were pretty defensive against him. And that's what players like Travis Head and obviously going back to Adam Gilchrist and obviously Rishabh Pant in the Indian side, that's what they make opposition captains do. They make you feel defensive, and you've got to put men out on the boundary and save runs. And that's what India sort of did really when Travis Head came to the crease. And we'll talk about that when we talk about India in terms of their tactics to Travis Head, but they didn't bowl enough short balls to Travis Head. And he has a weakness with the short ball. And obviously the World Test Championship final last year, he was caught down the leg side with a short ball aimed at the armpit. So India didn't go to that tactic all that much in this Test match to Travis Head. There were a couple of chances that Travis Head, he had a bit of luck as you need as a batter. He was dropped by Siraj on 76. That was off Ravi Ashwin. That was a big moment for India. Obviously, there was another missed chance on 78. He got an outside edge, and it went into the gap between Rishabh Pant and Rohit Sharma at first slip. So you had a bit of luck, Travis Head, but his innings, the Labuschagne and McSweeney partnership set up Travis Head for this innings and really laid that platform and foundation, which is what Australia needed. Travis Head, one hell of a player, and was able to change the game in a matter of moments. And being a fellow South Australian myself, I am a bit biased, but it's always great to see South Australia do well in the Test side, and it's great to see Travis Head do well. Obviously, we have to touch on a little bit about the Siraj and Travis Head interaction. Obviously, both of them have been fined by the match referee and reprimanded for that incident. But I think at the end of the day, it's pretty much the heat of the moment, the battle, when you're out there, both players are competitive and both players are doing what they can for their country. Bit of passion, bit of spirit, but also there's got to be a precedent set, and that's why we have a code of conduct for a reason. So both of them have been fined. Words were said. Let's hope this is the end of the matter and we can move on. But what it has done, it's created a bit of a rivalry between Head and Siraj for the remainder of the series, no doubt. That will be a big talking point as we go on in the next 3 test matches. But going back to Travis Head, he's done it for some time now. Since he's come back to the test side, he has no fear. He's going to play his natural game. He was seeing the ball well in this innings and, just tore India to shreds, really. India had no answers for Travis Head whatsoever. And that's what he does, because you don't know how to bowl to him. All the plans that you may have probably won't work anyway, because he's that sort of player that can do anything on his day. And that was an important innings from Head. Really set up the test match for Australia, allowed Australia to be miles in front of the game. And his innings really changed the course of the match, that's for sure. So good signs for Australia that Travis Head is scoring runs, and let's hope that can continue for the rest of the series. And for his sake as well, just to keep contributing to the team and do his role and keep doing his role in order to set the team up for success. So, Travis Head, one hell of a player. Certainly a player that, is a game changer for Australia. We've seen that in the World Test Championship final. We saw that in the World Cup last year. We've seen it in this test match here in Adelaide. If Australia are going to go on and win this series, he's going to play a very important part, and he certainly played an important part in this test match here. It was just unbelievable. The ball striking, the sound the ball made off the bat, hits the ball so hard, and he deserves the 100. It was a superb knock nonetheless. So Australia in the second innings needed 19 runs to win, and they chased them down pretty easily. There were none down. Khawaja and McSweeney got the job done there. And in that sort of situation as a batting side, when you're chasing a low target like Australia did, 19 runs, there's nothing much to gain really from a batting perspective as a batter, because there's nothing much to gain really. All you can do is get out. And I think it's so important that McSweeney and Khawaja stayed in and were there in the end. I think it was important for both of them really just to, stay there at the end, hit the winning runs. It's always a great feeling to hit the winning runs of a test match. And certainly Usman Khawaja did that when he pulled that ball for 4, which concluded the test match. It was an important thing to do for both Khawaja and McSweeney, just to stay in at the middle, send a bit of a message to India. For Australia to win by 10 wickets, it's a lot better than winning by 9 or 8 or 7 wickets, because a 10-wicket victory sounds more dominant. I know it doesn't really matter how much you win by, at least you win, and that was the important thing. Obviously, you've got to think about the win first, but I think psychologically, going forward in the series, for India to lose by 10 wickets, I think that's a good result for Australia to, really put a crushing victory towards India after what was a crushing defeat in Perth by 295 runs. So it does play on your mind a bit, and it is a psychological battle there. And for Australia, they certainly did that in this test match. But chase down the runs with ease. 19 runs was not going to be any problems. If India, probably got, 50 or 100 runs in front to set Australia to win, then it was probably going to be a little tricky run chase for Australia. But 19 runs, just under 20, was good enough for Australia to win this test match. So, so pretty good for Australia. Much better batting performance than it was in Perth. I suppose positive signs for Australia. We'll start with Marnus Labuschagne. He came in with the most pressure in this test match. Obviously, people doubting him, people saying he should be dropped after what happened in Perth. And let's be honest, he was pretty ordinary in Perth. It was horrible to watch, really, when he batted in Perth in both innings, especially the first innings in Perth. It was horrible to watch. It was like someone scratching their fingernails up against a blackboard, and you just had to take your eyes off it because it was just so cringeworthy and it's just horrible to look at. But Marnus, much better in this test match in Adelaide. He moved well into the ball. He showed positive intent. He was looking to score. He wasn't looking to, dig in and just, not score runs at all like he did in Perth. His cover drives were good. He was moving well into them. His flicks off his pads through mid-wicket were good, and that's sort of a trademark shot for Marnus as well. When he's flicking the ball off his pads through mid-wicket, he's on. He's looking to score runs, and we saw that from Marnus in this test match, that there were some good signs. He's not quite at his best. He's probably 50% back towards his best, but he got some of his mojo back. He was, looking pretty good when he was at the crease. And I think for Marnus, the more time he spent in the middle, the more time he built that confidence back and getting that self-belief back. When you're in a bit of a tough patch of form, it can often be difficult to, get motivated again and looking to, improve and get better. Marnus talked about, the 10 days between the Perth and the Adelaide test. He was working so hard on his batting. That just shows you that Marnus, really wants to improve and really address the areas of concern. And I think that's a great thing to hear, especially from players of his type and champions of any sport who are very good at what they do. It could have been easy for Marnus just to go away from the game, have a bit of a break, refresh mentally. But I think Marnus said, what's that going to do for me? Is that going to help me improve my game and get better? No. And really, by sitting around doing nothing is not going to help you improve. Doesn't matter if it's in cricket or anything in life. If you sit around and do nothing, then you're not doing anything to improve and get better as a person or as a cricketer or anything. So I think that's a great attitude for Marnus to have, that he wanted to really knuckle down and work hard on the areas that he needed to work on. And I think that's so important for him in terms of getting back to some sort of his best. But I was very impressed with Marnus, as everyone was. Coming into this test match, he was the most pressured Australian batter in the lineup. You could say about the same about Khawaja and Smith, but really Marnus was the main one that was under pressure, really. But to see him be a bit more positive, I think that nighttime period was a good thing for Marnus. I think he needed a high-pressure situation like that, where he batted with McSweeney during that nighttime period. I think it was important for him to have that experience, to be tested, to be put under the pump, and he delivered. And without Marnus and without McSweeney's partnership, Australia could have been in a whole different situation in this test match. But for Australia going forward, good signs that Labuschagne is really coming back into some sort of his best. He's not quite there yet, but he will get there. And hopefully for Australia, he can score more runs, especially going into Brisbane, which is his home ground. He loves playing at the Gabba, so hopefully he can score some runs there. But 64 off 126 in this innings is much better than we saw in Perth. He'll be disappointed not to get the century, but I suppose for Marnus, it's all about scoring runs, spending time in the middle. That's the main thing, and hopefully he can continue that, and hopefully he can get the monkey off his back and score that century eventually. Maybe in the next test, we shall wait and see. But great signs for Australia that Marnus is scoring runs. Nathan McSweeney was another positive. I thought he batted really well. Batted well in both innings, actually. He played some good shots across the two innings, especially in the second innings during the run chase. He played some good shots there. He played some, nice cut shots and cover drives, and he was looking pretty good. And obviously with Nathan, he's 2 test matches into his test career. He's learning on the job, just like Marnus. More time spending in the middle will build confidence and belief. And I think with McSweeney, the more time he spent in the middle, the more time he got used to batting in these sort of conditions in test cricket. This sort of, learning experience for him is very important. And I think, expectations and pressure, a lot of people want him to do well straight away. Well, that doesn't happen. you're not expected to do good things when you first come in to do something for the first time. With McSweeney, he's playing Test cricket for Australia. It's a different environment. It's daunting. Whenever you work towards something in life and you finally achieve the goal of doing what you want to set out to do, and then when you finally do it, you realize it's daunting, and you say, "Geez, this is tough. This is daunting. This is scary." And for McSweeney, that's what he would have felt in Perth and here in Adelaide. Second Test match into his career, spending the time in the middle, it's really helping him, just get into Test cricket, get into the groove and the rhythm of things. And, he'll be destined to do well in the next Test because obviously he's originally from Queensland. Brisbane is his home ground, obviously, but he's moved to South Australia to further his opportunities. But for him, just like with Marnus, hopefully they can score runs in Brisbane for that third Test match. But McSweeney did pretty well in both innings of this Test match. So those are a couple of positives for Australia. Also, Travis Head doing what he was doing was another positive as well. I think Australia would like Smith, Khawaja to spend some time in the middle and score runs. Both of them had pretty poor Test matches in terms of the run scoring in both innings. Khawaja, I suppose, in the second innings was not out in the run chase, which is a good thing, I suppose, but he was a bit disappointed to get out in the first innings. I thought he did pretty well to try and weather the storm from Bumrah, but unfortunately got out to him before Bumrah was about to end his first spell. Steve Smith caught down the leg side. He wasn't happy about that. So I think for Australia, now they've got Marnus scoring runs. They've got McSweeney, who's getting some confidence. Travis Head doing what he's doing. They will want Khawaja and Smith to score runs in the next Test just to boost their confidence and morale and certainly help out the others in terms of the batting and scoring runs. The other negative was Mitchell Marsh. We've got to talk about Mitchell Marsh a bit there. Had a bit of a brain fade. He thought he hit it. He thought he got an outside edge of Ravi Ashwin. Turns out, if he reviewed it, he was not out. There was a clear gap between the ball and the bat. And you could see Mitchell Marsh hitting his front pad with the bat. So it was bat onto pad. And as soon as he felt that sensation, the ball was next to the edge of the bat. And he thought, well, I hit it. But he didn't. So I think Mitchell Marsh has learned a valuable lesson there. If you're unsure, don't walk off, review it. And Australia had probably 3 reviews, I think, at that stage. He would have been disappointed about that, Mitchell Marsh, when he got back into the dressing room, no doubt. So something for him to remember next time is to not walk, because when he started to walk towards the dressing room, umpire Richard Illingworth raised his finger. And that's usually the indication to an umpire that, yeah, probably the batter's probably hit it, so I'll probably give it out. So I think for Mitch, a bit of a brain fade, but Australia need him to score runs as well. He scored some runs in Perth. He scored 40-odd in that second innings, 47. In this Test match, he only scored 9, but he could have scored a lot more if he didn't walk off because he wasn't out. But as I mentioned with Smith and Khawaja, they need Mitchell Marsh to score some runs as well. Going forward in terms of, making sure that he's getting some confidence and some time in the middle. But to finish off about Australia's batting before we talk about the bowling, really positive signs, really good signs. They're not quite at 100% yet, but it was a much better batting performance than it was in Perth. Let's just say that. And they'll be hoping that Labuschagne can continue on building from this innings here at Adelaide, McSweeney to get more confidence, Khawaja and Smith and Marsh to score some runs, obviously Alex Carey as well, and obviously Travis Head to keep doing what he's doing going forward. So let's hope that's the case. We'll move on to the bowling, talk about that. Not a surprise to see Australia dominant with the ball in terms of day-night tests in Adelaide especially. They are the champions when it comes to day-night test cricket. Bowled India out for 180 in the first innings and 175 in the second innings. Just shows how good of a bowling performance it was. They did the damage late on day 2, used the nighttime conditions well to take 5 wickets, and India were really reeling in that nighttime period where they lost 5 wickets. There were 5 down for not many at stumps, and that's where Australia did the damage and really put themselves in a good position in this test match. Obviously, when you have a 157-run lead, that certainly helps as well, and that wasn't the case in Perth, but it was the case here in Adelaide that Australia were able to get a good first innings lead, which they weren't able to do in Perth because they batted so poorly, but they batted well here in Adelaide to get that lead, and all thanks to Travis Head. They were able to attack with the ball and really you go in for the kill, and that's what they did on day 2, late on day 2. Mitchell Starc, what can we say about him? He is an absolute wizard with the pink ball. 6 for 48 in the first innings, best career figures. He got rid of Jaiswal first ball of the innings, which was a superb delivery from Mitchell Starc. A typical Mitchell Starc delivery, one that just swings back into the pads and traps you in front at pace. And it was a superb delivery from Starc. 74 wickets at an average of 18 in 13 matches with the pink ball. Just shows you how good of a bowler he is with the pink ball, especially if it gets moving and moves around all corners. And Mitchell Starc was superb, probably the best he's bowled in his whole career. He looks pretty good rhythm, good pace. We saw that in Perth as well. The same here in Adelaide. What can you say? 8 wickets for the match is a pretty good result for Starkey. Pat Cummins, very good comeback from Pat. Now, a lot was talked about Pat Cummins going into this test. His pace was down. He wasn't bowling as well in Perth. He was short of gallop. And that's true. He was. He didn't quite look like himself. His pace was down. He didn't have the miles in the legs. But here in Adelaide, he was back to his best, especially in the second innings, 5 wickets. And what I loved about Pat Cummins in the second innings was that he showed great passion and great aggressiveness, if I can say that, with the short ball. To the Indian tailenders. He bowled short balls, which really troubled the Indian tailenders when he got, Ashwin out with the short ball. Same with KL Rahul. Same with Rana. With the short balls that really upset them. Pat Cummins was very aggressive. And initially when Pat Cummins celebrates a wicket, he's not really that animated. Of course, he celebrates a wicket because, as a bowler, you do that. But in this innings, he wanted to prove a point, I think. And judging by his celebrations, he was more fired up and passionate and had that passion and that look in the eyes more than ever because he wanted to prove a point. And he certainly did that. He bowled a superb delivery to Rohit Sharma that was absolutely perfection, hitting the top of off stump. It reminded me of that delivery he bowled to Joe Root, 2019 Ashes at Old Trafford. Similar delivery to Rohit Sharma, hit the top of off stump. And that's what Pat Cummins can do. He's that sort of bowler that's accurate and always challenging you as a batter, especially on that off stump. He was superb. Good to see the skipper bounce back. Very important for Australia to see Pat Cummins bounce back. They want him to lead from the front. He certainly did that in the second innings of this test match. So good to see Pat Cummins returning back to his best. Scott Boland came in for Josh Hazlewood. And what can you say about Scott? He's always reliable, Scott Boland. Obviously, doing the job. The second innings was superb. He got rid of Jaiswal, first ball of his spell in the second innings. And then he got rid of Virat Kohli for the second time. Obviously, he got rid of Virat Kohli in that World Test Championship final where he got him out, caught behind, as he did in this test match. But in that World Test Championship final, in that run chase, Scott Boland, when he came on to bowl that morning in that game, he got rid of Kohli, and that pretty much changed the course of that final in Australia's favour. And he did exactly the same thing here in Adelaide as well in the second innings. It just hits the spot, first ball, Scott. He bowls that good line, good length, and just always at you. And he got a bit of tap from Kumar Reddy and Rishabh Pant, who tried to hit him off his line in length. But let's just gloss over that. what mattered was that he picked up the wickets, and that's all that matters. And he picked up 5 wickets for the match. He could have had more wickets. He bowled a no ball, first ball of his over in the first innings to KL Rahul, and then obviously in the same over, Khawaja dropped KL Rahul, which was a genuine outside edge at slip. So, it was all happening for Scott, but it was great to see him return to the side to replace Josh Hazlewood. Obviously, for Scott, he may miss out in Brisbane because Josh is raring to go from that side strain that he picked up in the first test. So, that's what Scott Boland is. He's a reliable bowler, good bowler, always gets the job done. Good team man as well, Scott. But, really impressed with how he bowled. And I think Australia will be impressed overall with the bowling performance. They just know how to bowl with the pink ball. They bowled a fuller length compared to India. They used the seam and the swing and the conditions to their advantage. Obviously, Mitchell Starc, as I mentioned before, the wizard with the pink ball. Pat Cummins, what he was doing in the second innings. Scott Boland. And Nathan Lyon. Nathan Lyon had, pretty much an easy workload in this test match. He only bowled 1 over. So tough work for Nathan Lyon there. But I think he'll do a bit more bowling in the Brisbane test, obviously, but not required here in Adelaide for the pink ball. And he's got a pretty good pink ball record, Nathan Lyon, in Adelaide especially. But he wasn't required in this test match because it was pretty much dominated by the Pacers. And obviously, I suppose Nathan Lyon caused a bit of drama because he was the one responsible, apparently, for the lights going out. He wanted to have a bit of a bat as Australia were batting in that nighttime period on day one, and that's where the lights went off and all that happened. But I suppose, mistakes like that happen, I suppose. But it was a bit of a funny thing that happened during the test match. But going back to Australia's bowling performance, very dominant, as you would expect with the pink ball. Not a surprise. And I think they'll be very happy with their input, the bowlers, and the way that they bowled. So very good signs. Just to finish off about Australia's bowling, their fielding, there were some drop catches, half chances that weren't taken. As I mentioned before, Khawaja dropping KL Rahul off Scott Boland in the first over. There were some half chances as well. But besides from that, the fielding was much better from Australia compared to Perth. Good intensity, good intent. They were up and about. There was some good chatter. So that's a good sign. That's usually an indication of, where a team's at in terms of their mindset and positive intent and looking to be in the contest. And that was a good sign from Australia. So very good to see that from Australia to make those improvements. But overall for Australia, the team performance was pretty good. Dominated from ball 1, where Mitchell Starc took that wicket with the first ball of the innings to Jaiswal. They dominated from that point until the end of the test match with the last ball where Usman Khawaja pulled that ball to the boundary for 4 to pretty much seal the victory for Australia and to level the series at 1-1. And very dominant performance by the Australian team. And it's a bounce back that they needed to happen. They needed to come out and really show and prove a point that they can bounce back and they can get back into this series. And they've certainly done that. And now they're off and running. And for India, it's not as straightforward as it was after the first test in Perth, because Australia have come back and, a 1-1 series scoreline going into Brisbane. It sets up a very interesting last 3 test matches of this series against Australia and India. But Australia, they'll be very pleased with the performance and good to see them bounce back in the way they did. Now, let's move on and talk about India, talk about their performance in this test match with bat and ball. India will be disappointed at the result, given what happened in Perth in the first test, a very dominant victory, and it was. They played really well. But they'll be disappointed about how they performed in this test match. Obviously, people will say it's a day-night test. India haven't played a lot of day-night cricket compared to Australia, and that's true. But also, they would have liked to perform better. Put that to one side. If it was a day-night test or a red ball test, they would like to perform better than they did in this test match. It was disappointing. Whenever you lose by 10 wickets, it's always a disappointing result. We'll talk about the batting. Bowled out for 180 and 175 in both innings showed that they did struggle with the with the bat. And there's a bit of a pattern emerging. Now, they got bowled out for 150 in Perth, and in this test match, they got bowled out for 180 and 175. You're not going to win too many test matches if you get bowled out for those sort of scores. And that is a concern for India going forward for the remaining 3 tests, is about scoring first innings runs and big first innings runs. Obviously in Perth, when they scored that mammoth total in the second innings where they scored 487, that was a bit of an outlier. But the other innings in this series thus far, apart from that, it is a pattern emerging that they are not really making the most of those opportunities batting first, especially first innings, and especially in this game with the second innings. Batting has been a bit poor. In this test match, it was no different. Obviously with the pink ball, challenging conditions, but really in the first innings, they were in a good position. There's 69 runs on the board for 1 wicket down. They were looking good. They were looking set. They were looking to score a big total, and then they lost those wickets in a heap. I think they lost 3 wickets just before the first break on day 1, and that really set them back and really put them behind in this test match. The second innings, 157 runs behind. They lost 5 wickets late on day 2. When obviously Australia were bowling under lights, they lost early wickets. The top order didn't really hold up. They didn't really dig in like we saw from McSweeney and Labuschagne in Australia's first innings. Jaiswal, Gill played some good shots, but then got out. Virat Kohli nicked off to Boland. Rahul was gloved down the leg side by a short ball from Cummins. Rohit Sharma looked out of sorts. He looked very, very out of sorts. He looked uncomfortable. We'll talk about Rohit Sharma in a minute. But the only one who was really comfortable in both innings was Nitish Kumar Reddy, 42 in both innings. So he scored 84 runs across the 2 innings. Is pretty good. And he was probably India's best batter in this test match by far. Some of the shots he played, especially in the first and second innings, were quite exceptional. He hit a few sixes and boundaries, and he was really disappointed with himself when he got out of the second innings, where he fell for the trap and he played the uppercut and he glided it straight to Nathan McSweeney at third man. The trap was set for that and he fell for the trap. But he is definitely someone to look out for in the future, that's for sure. And, he did pretty well in Perth as well. I think in Perth he scored 41 in the first innings there, and in the second innings he scored 38. So he's definitely one of India's leading run scorers in this series thus far. So he's been really the standout, really, especially in this test match. So India, trailing by 157 in the second innings. Day 3, it was an opportunity for them to, probably set Australia some sort of target to chase. In the end, it was only 19 runs. There was some real optimism, maybe a little bit of, sort of fantasy, really, that Rishabh Pant and Kumar Reddy could do something special. But once Rishabh Pant got out last ball of the first over to Mitchell Starc, he looked very uncomfortable defending Pant. He's more better when he's looking to attack. He's not really too concerned when he's in attack mode. But when he's in defensive mode and looking to play with a straight bat and the ball challenging the outside edge, he's more vulnerable. And that's what we saw in that dismissal. Starc got him out last ball of the first over on day 3. And that pretty much set the tone for the Indian innings. And then the rest of the batting failed after that. Ashwin, Rana, Bumrah, Siraj. You weren't really going to get much for the tailenders there, were you? And that's what happened. They got bowled out for 175. They set Australia 19 runs to win, which wasn't really a challenging target. And, they were under the pump. I mentioned Rohit Sharma. Obviously, Kohli is under pressure because he followed his sort of trend and pattern in his form slump, really. He scores 100 and then doesn't score 100 in the next game. But I suppose that's just the way cricket goes with batting. I suppose you're not going to score 100 every game. But, he's under some sort of pressure, obviously, to perform. In this test match, nicking off in both innings is a concern. He's got a technical problem there. Maybe he could do, I've heard some people say, maybe he could do a Sachin Tendulkar and not play anything outside the off stump and wait until the bowlers bowl to his pads and probably play on the leg side or something like that. But I don't think Virat Kohli's going to do that. There was only one person who could do that, and it was Sachin Tendulkar. Kohli under the pump. But you have to say Rohit Sharma's under the pump as well. Very disappointing performance by Rohit Sharma. Now, we've got to remember Rohit Sharma hasn't played a lot of cricket. He hasn't played since the New Zealand series in November. He didn't play the first test in Perth because he was with his family because of the birth of his second child, I should say. He's batting down the order. He hasn't batted down the order since the start of his career, but since he's come back to the test side, he's been opening the batting, and obviously he's captain now. But he looked very uncomfortable, Rohit. The first innings got out LBW to Scott Boland for 3, and then in the second innings he got a very good ball from Pat Cummins to hit the top of off stump, which he couldn't have done anything about that. That was just an absolute jaffer of a delivery. Nothing Rohit Sharma could have done there, but he is under pressure. Kohli and Rohit are under pressure because of their form slump. They really need to stand up going forward, but especially Rohit Sharma. And if he doesn't do well in Brisbane, then questions will be asked. So the Indian batting lineup in this test match, there was a lot of starts. Obviously, Kumar Reddy, KL Rahul in the first innings and Jaiswal in the second innings, Gill in both innings. They got starts, but they couldn't go on. And Rishabh Pant got starts as well, but couldn't go on with it. So for India, they need to make the most of the first innings. They can't afford to have these, 150, 180, 175 totals. It's not going to win you too many test matches. And going into Brisbane, that's something that they need to address very quickly. Otherwise, the bowlers can't get them out of the jam all the time. They got away with it in Perth, but they didn't get away with it here in Adelaide. And it's something that they need to work on going forward. So that's the batting side of things. The bowling side of things, I thought India were a bit off the mark. I think that's fair to say that. Obviously, Jasprit Bumrah was the standout, of course, in the first innings. But other than that, the other bowlers like Rana, even though Siraj took 4 wickets, but he struggled at times. Kumar Reddy, Ashwin didn't really have the impact that they would have liked. And they also didn't make use of the new ball under the nighttime conditions. On day one, where McSweeney and Labuschagne were batting so well, they sort of wasted the new ball. They bowled a fraction short. They didn't bowl full enough. They didn't challenge the stumps. They didn't make Labuschagne and McSweeney play all that often. Labuschagne and McSweeney were able to leave the ball quite comfortably outside the off stump and were very watchful. I think India wasted an opportunity there. If they took 3 or 4 wickets, then they would have been probably in front in the test match. That was an opportunity to really dominate the test match, but they weren't able to do that. They were able to take 1 wicket in that period, and that was Bumrah getting rid of Khawaja. But other than that, they really struggled in that nighttime period on day one, and that's where they didn't grab their opportunity. And also they struggled to Travis Head. They didn't bowl enough short balls to him. They were very defensive when Travis Head came out because obviously that's what, as I mentioned earlier, that's what Travis Head and those types of players do, is they make you feel like you have to be defensive straight away and save boundaries. And India just sort of lost their way with Travis Head. He was smacking everyone. He was smashing Harshit Rana especially. He really lined up Rana. Siraj the same as well until Siraj got rid of Head in the end. Obviously, Head took a liking to Ashwin, hit him for a 6 or 2, which were pretty good hits. And that's the problem with India, the support bowlers. And that's going to be a big talking point for the remainder of the series, is that Bumrah can't do it all on his own. And Rohit Sharma, after the game in his press conference, said to the bowlers, well, you've got to stand up. We can't have Bumrah just doing it on his own. There's also some injury concerns with Jasprit Bumrah as well. He did grab at his groin. He looked a little bit uncomfortable, even though it was cramp. But still, him grabbing at his groin, looking a bit in discomfort and pain, is a concern for India going forward, because they don't have anyone else who can fill that void, really. No one can replace a Jasprit Bumrah. Only Jasprit Bumrah can be Jasprit Bumrah because he's such a special bowler. So they can't afford him to get injured. So the other bowlers have to do their job. And what we saw in this test match, they struggled. They were pedestrian-like. They didn't really have the impact that Bumrah had. So I think that's a real game plan for Australia. And what we saw in this test match was that get through Bumrah, get through his first couple of spells, and then start to target the other bowlers and really put them under pressure. And that's what Australia did. That's what Travis Head did. And it was clear to see in this test match. So that's a concern for India going into Brisbane, is that, the other bowling options need to stand up, and they really need to stand up. Obviously, Siraj picked up 4 wickets, and we all know what happened there with Travis Head. Probably, we won't go over that again, but, he took 4 wickets, but he went for some runs as well. So it can't be Bumrah alone. And, Rana could miss out the next test. Maybe they could play Akashdeep or Pradesh Krishna as another bowling option, because, he did really show his inexperienced, Rana. He's only playing in his second test match. He bowled well in Perth, but he didn't bowl well here. And obviously he's a young guy. He's only playing his second test. So that's the questions that India will have to ask themselves going forward, is what do we do with that other bowling option? And can the other bowlers support Bumrah? And that's the question. So I think for India, they weren't quite at their best with the ball. And they will be looking to improve that in Brisbane, no doubt. But the question marks will be, can the other bowlers support Bumrah? And will Jasprit Bumrah be fit with this short turnaround for the game in Brisbane? Those are the 2 question marks that they have with their bowling at the moment. But overall performance for India, I think they'll be disappointed with the way they batted and bowled in this test match. I think they were below par after what happened in Perth, up and about, celebrating what was a very dominant win. No one really expected India to win in Perth the way they did, with how enormous the victory was. But to lose by 10 wickets here in Adelaide, they're really on the back foot, and they've got to bounce back and, really find a way to bounce back now, because this series is at 1-1 and Australia have got their tails up and a bit of momentum on their side. So, but India got some question marks with the batting. They've got to improve their batting. Some vulnerabilities and weaknesses there. They've got to make use of the first innings. They can't afford to make scores of 150, 180, 175. They're not going to win you too many test matches. The bowling needs to support Bumrah better. And those are the question marks going into Brisbane. But India disappointed with the result. No doubt, when you lose by 10 wickets, you're going to be disappointed. But what we do know with this Indian team is that they have the ability to bounce back. And we all know what they did 4 years ago at the Gabba. So we have to wait and see if they can do that, and whether or not this Indian team is capable of doing that. So let's wait and see what happens come the 3rd test in Brisbane. Speaking of the 3rd test in Brisbane, it's now time to preview the 3rd test match of this Border-Gavaskar Trophy, and it will be at the Gabba. And let's have a look at some of the stats between Australia and India in test matches at the Gabba. First test match was back in 1947. 7 test matches have been played. 1 of them have been drawn. Australia won 5, and obviously India won, which was the famous victory back in 2020-21. Now, the last 2 test matches that Australia and India have played at the Gabba, 2014-15, Australia won by 4 wickets. And obviously, 4 years ago, 2020-21, India won by 3 wickets. And those are the last 2 results between Australia and India at the Gabba in terms of the last 2 test matches that the teams have played. In terms of both teams, they've got a lot of questions to ask themselves in terms of selection and in terms of how they're going to go about winning this test match. We'll start with Australia. And obviously, Australia will probably make one change, Josh Hazlewood for Scott Boland. Now, from all reports, Josh Hazlewood looks like he's pretty much 100% ready to go for Brisbane because he had that side strain which prevented him from playing this test match in Adelaide. So Scott Boland did a pretty good job, as we know, but he's probably going to be the one that's going to miss out, which is a bit harsh. But if Josh Hazlewood's not 100%, then Scott Boland will keep his spot. So I think Australia will make one change. If Hazlewood's fit, Scott Boland misses out. If Hazlewood isn't fit, then they'll probably keep the same 11 as they did for the second test. So potential 11 for Australia could be, Khawaja, McSweeney, Labuschagne, Smith, Head, Mitchell Marsh, Carey, Cummins, Stark, Line, Hazlewood, or Scott Boland, depending on Josh Hazlewood's fitness. So that's Australia in terms of their potential 11 and changes to their 11. We'll talk about India in terms of changes to their 11. Now, there has been some talk about some changes for India's 11. They've made 3 changes from the Perth test to the Adelaide test, obviously, which saw Shubman Gill, Rohit Sharma, and Ravi Ashwin come back into the side. Now, there's some talk about changes, especially maybe Rana missing out, and probably Akashdeep or Pradesh Krishna to play. I don't think India need to make too many changes. I think they just probably need to make a change in terms of either Akashdeep or Krishna coming in for Rana because of that 4th bowling option being a concern for them. And then obviously Rana going for runs and getting smashed. And obviously the support that Bumrah needs because he can't do it on his own, as we've mentioned throughout this episode today. So I think India will make one change. There has been some talk about Jadeja coming in, but do you really need 2 spinners at the Gabba? Probably not. And with Nitish Kumar Reddy being that sort of seam all-round option for India, and he's batting so well, I don't think you need to take him out in probably sacrifice of Jadeja. I think Jadeja will probably get his opportunity, maybe in Melbourne, maybe in Sydney. Probably Sydney, definitely, because there's always talk about playing 2 spinners there. So I think India just need to make the one change and probably Rana out for either Akashdeep or Krishna. So the potential 11 for India could be Jaiswal, KL Rahul, Gill, Kohli, Pant, Rohit Sharma, Kumar Reddy, Ashwin, Akashdeep, or Pradesh Krishna, Bumrah, and Siraj. So that could be India's potential 11 for the 3rd test. In terms of, who's going to win this test match in Brisbane. Now, obviously, India have good memories of what happened here 4 years ago with obviously Rishabh Pant doing what he was doing and India on their knees and, a very famous victory. Australia, on the other hand, coming into this test match with momentum after bouncing back well. You would say advantage to Australia because of the win here in Adelaide and the momentum. India, got some question marks and obviously coming from a very good victory in Perth to a very crushing defeat here in Adelaide. They've got some questions to ask themselves, mainly around the support for Bumrah in terms of the bowling support, as we've already discussed, but also the batting as well. So I think what we're going to expect in Brisbane is probably a typical Gabba wicket. I think we're going to have a good batting surface, as you do at the Gabba. You're going to have some, good bounce and good pace and carry. You're going to have maybe a little bit of tinge of green grass on the surface because at the Gabba, there's always a bit of tinge of green on the surface day one of the test match there. And the ball will do a bit early on. The other factor we have to bear in mind is that this test match is in December. Now, the test match that was played between Australia and India 4 years ago was in January. And that was towards the end of the Australian summer, where the pitches were tired and worn. But whereas this time around in December, We're not even halfway through the season. The pitches are still really fresh, and it will be no different at the Gabba. So I think it will be a different sort of test match to what we saw 4 years ago in terms of the test matches being played at different times. That one 4 years ago was played in January. This one's being played in December. The pitches will be a lot fresher. There'll be some more life in the surface, so to speak. So I think we'll see a different test match this time around in 2024, 2025. So as we've said in this series, it's very hard to predict who's going to win, because it's sort of like that sort of thing between Australia and India in test matches, is that if one team loses badly, the other team will come back and fight back. And that's what we've seen in this test match thus far. Australia fighting back after the crushing defeat in Perth. We saw that from India 4 years ago, where they lost in Adelaide by 36 runs in that day-night test. They were able to come back in Melbourne, draw that game in Sydney, and then obviously win here at the Gabba in that famous victory with Rishabh Pant doing Rishabh Pant things. So it's very hard to predict who's going to win. But what it does do is, with the series at 1-1, it does set up a very mouth-watering contest for this third test, but also for the next two test matches to follow. Obviously, Boxing Day in Melbourne, and then obviously the New Year's test in Sydney. So, yeah, I don't know. You could flip a coin, and that could tell you the winner. But what I will say is that it's probably going to be a great test match. We shall see who wins. But what we do know is that both teams do have the ability to bounce back. And it will be an interesting test match nonetheless. So, who knows? Who knows who will win that third test of the Gabba? But you would say Australia have momentum, given that they won here in Adelaide. But what we do know with India, and as I mentioned before, and as others have mentioned, that they do have an ability to bounce back from setbacks and adversity. So we shall see what happens for that third test at the Gabba, but it should be an exciting test match nonetheless. Now then, some final thoughts to end our review of this second test between Australia and India for this Border-Gavaskar Trophy. After a crushing defeat by 295 runs in Perth, Australia needed a miracle to get back into the series, and they certainly got that in the city of churches in Adelaide. They certainly got that miracle. They won by 10 wickets, and it's what they needed to bounce back and to reaffirm to everyone that this Australian team, that performance in Perth was definitely a one-off, and they're certainly hitting the ground running again, and they're back in the series. The series is at 1-1, and hopefully they can go on and perform better as the series progresses. As expected, Australia are the day-night test kings. Stark's magnificent performance with the pink ball showed his skills. Heads 100 captivated the Adelaide Oval crowd, and Cummins' 5 wickets in the second innings has got him back and running in this series. India will be disappointed by the result after a dominant victory in Perth, and to lose by 10 wickets will hurt. They have some questions to address ahead of the third test, as we mentioned, with the batting and the bowling support to Bumrah. But despite that, they do have the ability to bounce back, as we know from past performances, and especially in 2020-21. Despite all those things, this second test match, despite going for 3 days, we've witnessed another great day-night test in Adelaide, breaking all sorts of record for crowd attendance, etc. We saw some very captivating cricket over the 3 days, and Australia bouncing back in style and looking to, really continue on this winning momentum. India will be licking the wounds, but as we know, they have the ability to bounce back. But with the series at 1-1, it's shaping up to be an exciting 3 test matches to come, and I'm no doubt everyone will be excited to see what happens in the next 3 test matches of this series, because it's certainly going to be an exciting series conclusion, and it is going to be a great finish to the series. With the series being set up so well now, 1-1, it is going to be a great series. Well, thanks everyone for listening or watching to our second test review of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India. If you're watching or listening to this episode of the podcast on our YouTube channel, let us know your thoughts on this second test of the Border-Gavaskar Trophy between Australia and India in the comments. We would love to hear what you have to say. Also, make sure you subscribe to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast YouTube channel. Click the bell so you don't miss out on any of the episodes that we will be posting from this Border-Gavaskar Trophy. Also, the live streams as well from each of the test matches. Make sure you click the bell, subscribe to the Dibbly Dobbly Podcast YouTube channel so you don't miss out on the episodes and live streams from this Border-Gavaskar series, because it's certainly shaping up to be an exciting series as we enter the last 3 test matches of this series. It's sure to be an exciting series nonetheless. Thanks for watching and listening. Until next time, keep safe and bye for now.